Clean up in aisle 5. You're gonna need tear gas, pepper spray, and assault gear just to listen to this show.
Sasquatch, the moon landing, UFOs, 9/11, flat earth, JFK. All of these things have one thing in common: unanswered questions. So let's get to the bottom of that.
Now here's something completely random.
Animals in action, animals in action.
Random.
We using that in the intro?
Thank you and good night.
Dice Man Enterprises exclusively presents a talk show that will get to the bottom of things once and for all. And now here's your host for Let's Get to the Bottom of That, a bunch of weirdos on a mic.
Top of the morning.
Slancha.
Welcome into another episode of Let's Get to the Bottom of That. I'm your host, Byron Dice, and I'm joined in studio by my co-hosts, a bunch of weirdos on a mic. Welcome in Curtis.
Slan.
And Jason. What's up?
Hey, that's a Joey face.
That's a Joey face.
That was really good.
Representing the Joey face.
R.I.P. Joey.
Oh, man. Yeah, we miss you, Joey. That's the bad thing about if you're going to miss a recording day, you're out for 4 shows. You're out for a month.
You're out for a month.
For 4 shows.
He was out last 4 months. Or last 4 weeks.
Oh, was he? Well, no, the week before, the month before that he was on.
Yeah, in May.
It's gonna be May.
May was good.
April.
May we had him on. Today we're talking about CRISPR, which basically what that means is if you go to KFC, you can get extra crispy or you can get an original recipe.
Yeah.
That's what
What's
CRISPR.
Extra
I never see.
CRISPR.
I never know the difference.
Well, you don't?
No, I don't
Well,
see
the
the
original recipe is like wilty and just kind of nasty.
I feel like both of them are.
Extra crispy, you're gonna take a tooth out.
Have you ever been into a KFC restaurant? Like the kitchen?
Yeah,
Oh no,
It's disgusting.
I don't want to go back there.
I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to get...
it's delicious.
You don't want to get that. Could be a future sponsor.
I don't want them.
Extra CRISPR. Well, CRISPR is talking about gene manipulation, I believe, but we have an expert to talk about that with us today. It's one of our listeners that has joined us on our live streams before. They've left tons of comments in our comment section to tell us exactly where we should speak in
And
the
where we
country
should be
and where we
silent.
should be silent.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Hanna Hicks. Let me get
Hannah
her in
Hicks.
here. Yeah,
There
what's
she
up?
Woo!
She is.
The expert.
I'm not an expert, but I'm a friend who's willing to help.
There we go.
We'll take that.
Welcome in, Hannah. I think most of our listeners are no stranger to you. I think since we have met on the internet in this show,
Interwebs.
interwebs, you have become an integral part of kind of shaping our narrative here. And sometimes you keep us on the tracks because sometimes we go off the rails.
I think she's a bot, honestly.
Oh, really? She's still the dead internet?
She's a part of the... Are
Yeah,
you a
I'm
bot?
actually AI.
You're
I am.
AI,
I'm
so-
AI.
Self-proclaimed.
I don't exist.
I figured it out.
I
Hannah.
always want to ask the guys, as far as recording, do you like this view or the this view better? Just for
Full screen.
you like that one?
Yeah,
Or this
most
one?
of these people are listening to it on phones, so that
Okay.
makes the image smaller.
Okay, cool. All right, well, let's get into it today. You guys got any updates for current events? Anything? I know Curtis just got back a couple of weeks ago from Ireland.
Ireland.
And did you actually drink some Irish whiskey
Oh yeah,
while you were there?
yeah.
And the pubs were open at 9.
Red Spot, was it?
Right.
Pubs are open now. They actually, funny thing is, I went into one of the pubs and I always heard have a beer with breakfast, right? Is something, and I was like, I'll try that. So I go in and I said, give me a pint of the black, and he goes, we're not all alcoholics. And I was like, he goes, what the hell are you talking about? And I was like, I'm sorry, dude. And also
And
for
you were
anybody,
just joking around?
no, I was gonna get a
Oh,
pint
he
of
was like,
Guinness
"We're
for
not
breakfast. I was
alcoholics?"
like, but yeah, he was like, what do you think we do over here? And he's like, I can't sell it to you till 11 or 12 or something like that. Anyway, so
liberals.
and then never order a black and tan over there
Never? Okay.
or an Irish car bomb.
Okay.
It'd be like going to New York and going, hey, can I get a 911?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not doing that.
So that's just a PSA. If you're ever traveling Ireland, especially the north of Ireland, don't order those two.
Can I get a 911? Come out to drop a bomb in the bathroom.
Yeah, can I get an Oklahoma City, please?
Yeah.
By the way, Curtis has a new hat. As
hat.
per the norm, he has a new hat every time we drop an episode.
Got a story behind
What do
this
we
one.
talk about this one?
So this is Mulligan's on Poolbeg Street, and it is a pub in Dublin that serves the best pint of Guinness I've ever had.
Wow.
I asked them what their secret was. They said that Guinness comes in and cleans out the lines like monthly. They store it at the exact same temperature all the time, and they clean the glasses a certain way that leaves no residue or anything like that.
So this is a free
that's the
advertisement for
difference.
them.
Free advertisement. Oh, and shout out to my guy, Jerry McGuire, who was our bartender there, who poured our drinks. Took
His
selfies
name was
with us.
Jerry?
Show me.
Yeah,
the
no.
money!
He said, "Don't do that." He said, "Don't do that." He hates that. And I said, Jerry, help me, help you,
help me,
help you.
Hannah
Anyway.
hasn't seen the movie. Have you, Hannah?
I don't think so.
Okay, well,
Watch it one of these days.
Yes.
Jerry Maguire,
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
but he's a great guy. He came across the bar, took selfies with us, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
His actual name was Jerry Maguire.
Yeah.
Well, it would be funny if he had a coworker. I don't know the guy's name in Cocktails, but that would have been even funnier.
What do you mean?
Cocktail.
The movie Cocktail.
Movie Cocktails.
Cocktails.
Tom Cruise
Tom
was
Cruise.
behind it doing the
Oh,
bottle
okay.
thing.
Yeah,
Anyway,
never saw that one.
I digress.
Oh man, Tom Cruise.
Let's talk about extra crispy.
CRISPR.
So CRISPR is spelled CRISPR. Now here's how I ran across
The
this.
E is silent.
I did. Oh, is there an E in there?
No.
How about all the?
No, it's an acronym.
Yes.
Oh, so
See,
we're about
that's
to,
why we have the
We're
expert.
about to find out. So here's how I ran across this. And Hannah actually mentioned, hey, y'all should do a show on this after we read an article about people bringing woolly mammoths back.
No, dire wolves.
No, I did a woolly mammoth, a
Yeah.
mouse. They were bringing mouse,
okay.
and you saw
Yeah.
they had long hair and all. It was genetic manipulation.
It was just rats.
And Hannah was like, you know what? You should do an episode on CRISPR. And I was like,
did they
what
grow
the heck does
tusks
that
yet?
mean? I hope so.
Oh.
And that would be great. Put them in like a Thunderdome
Yeah. Oh.
and the dire wolf. Anyway, so if you want to go high level, give me a definition of the CRISPR, Hannah, and what it stands for. And I've got several questions here. We can just go down the list if you want. But if you want to go ahead and just give us definition and a kind of an overview of what CRISPR means, or should we care about it?
Yeah, sure. So CRISPR has been kind of big out in the world sphere since it came on the scene. I think back in like 2012 is kind of when it started to come to attention. And so it's a gene editing technique. And it's not new or unique. They've been talking about gene therapy and gene editing for a long time. It was just kind of revolutionary as it became just one of the most efficient ways to do gene editing. And obviously, just because of the nature of it, it started to raise a lot of ethical questions and concerns as some of the stuff started to become more, seem like it was more possible and more probable. So it's actually where it came from. It's a natural process that takes place in bacteria and archaea. It's part of their immune defense system against viruses. So a virus latches onto a bacteria and it actually injects like a strand of DNA into the bacteria, which carries the infection.
Mm-hmm.
And so CRISPR is basically a system where the bacteria is able to capture and keep those sections of viral DNA and then recognize them to destroy future viral invaders. So basically, the virus comes in, a section of that DNA is kept, it gets integrated into the bacteria's own DNA, which it then translates into RNA, and it gets broken up into these segments and bound to enzymes or proteins. And those proteins can then, with the help of that RNA, it kind of works as like a surveillance complex. So they're able to recognize in the future when that viral DNA is injected again, and it's able to attach onto that DNA with the help of the RNA and basically unwind it and destroy it. So it keeps them from getting infected again. So like I said before, it's an acronym. So it stands for Clustered Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. um, so
whoa. Say that again real slow for the people in the back.
Clustered Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats.
Wow.
I'm going to break down what all that means.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So clustered, I think, is kind of self-explanatory. It has to do with a group of something all together in one space. So this would be along the strand of the bacterial DNA. So interspaced comes from these unique DNA segments that are called spacers. And this is where they take the viral DNA and they keep a copy of it. They keep it and put it in their own DNA. So you want to think of the spacers almost as like your Google Drive or the backup on your phone. It's like a memory, essentially.
Okay.
Um, and these they act as they kind of help, like I said, they kind of help to sorry, I got lost in my notes here. Oh, okay. So then the palindromic repeats. So a palindrome is something that actually occurs in English as well. It's a word that is
Forwards and
spelled the
backwards.
same. Yes, backwards and forwards. So my name is actually a palindrome. Civic, the word civic is a palindrome.
It is. How about that?
Gotcha.
Taco cat.
Thank you.
Yes,
I didn't know
yes,
that was
Taco
called that.
Cat.
Dad.
Yes, damn.
Byron.
So in not quite, but close.
He'll get it by the end of the episode.
Um, so in DNA, a palindrome is essentially the same thing as a word in English. It's a DNA sequence that reads the same backwards as forwards. So if you have a DNA sequence that's ATGTA, that's a palindrome because it reads the same backwards and forwards. And these are the recognition sequences. So they act as road signs. They kind of signal to the proteins where they are in the strand of DNA. So they can kind of help them find these sequences of stored viral DNA. And I kind of tried to find why these palindromes are important, like what's the purpose of having a DNA sequence that's the same. Um, and I don't quite completely understand all of this, but essentially it has to do with like forming a hairpin structure when they make the RNA, that they're able to fold into this structure that makes them more stable. I don't completely understand how that all works, but that's the purpose of the palindrome.
Okay.
So clustered interspaced short palindromic repeats. So you have a group of these palindromes in these repeats. So you'll have like multiple of them. And between them, they have these spacers, which are these sections of viral DNA. So have I lost you yet?
No. You actually explained it pretty well.
I was going to ask
tracking.
this, since we're talking about the acronym of this thing. Is this a natural occurrence, or is this somebody actually doing this stuff?
No, so this is natural. This happens in bacteria
Okay.
and archaea.
Okay.
So they discovered this in like 1987. They discovered this process, and then people started getting interested in, can we possibly use this in gene editing therapy techniques? And the first paper, I believe this is correct, the first paper that kind of published the idea of repurposing this was published in 2012.
Okay, I graduated in '87, by the way. The other question is, why would someone want to do gene editing?
I mean,
yeah. So I'm about to get into some of the uses they're looking into doing this for.
What's that quote from Jurassic Park?
Your scientists were so concerned with whether or not they should. They didn't stop to consider whether or not they could. Or they,
that's my question. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this process does not exist in humans the way it does in bacteria. They've found some sequences that are similar to bacterial CRISPRs, but they just don't function the same way, and they don't use the same proteins, essentially. So the uses that have been proposed for this, because you can, this technically could give you the ability to edit the genome of any living thing. The main one that people have talked about is disease treatment and gene therapy. So a lot of genetic diseases that are really debilitating and can shorten people's lifespans are inherited. It's a result of mutations in the genes that get passed from the parent. So this is like sickle cell anemia, muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's, which if you're familiar with any of those, they can be really, really devastating. I actually knew a girl growing up who had cystic fibrosis, and she had a really hard time. She was very, very sick all the time. So that's probably the biggest
That's
like
probably the
saying that
reason why
people.
somebody wanted to edit a gene.
Yeah. So
That's
so
one of the, that's one of them. That's one of
Okay.
them.
and
Hmm.
interesting enough, the reason why I thought this was a great topic is because, um, unfortunately, I listen to NPR sometimes. Um, liberal. Um, they had a segment on there talking about CRISPR, talking about the Chinese scientists. I don't know if you know about this, Hannah. Um,
Hmm.
they edited two twin babies in utero
Hmm.
for so they can be immune to HIV, the HIV virus, and it worked. And so in 2018, there was a big uproar because they said it was
Hmm.
the ethics of doing that in utero and
How do they know it worked?
huh.
Did
Well, they
they
don't. So
do they
they,
expose
That's a
them to
good
HIV?
question.
they're claiming it does. Whether it's you know something that's been you know
I guess could you take
So
their
I
proved.
think,
could you take their
well,
blood?
yeah, so you can take a sample of like any cells. So like
Oh, gotcha.
every single cell in your body contains your DNA. Every
Gotcha.
single cell. So you can take cells and
Mhm.
sequence the
And then see if
DNA,
they're immune.
Yeah.
and see if you successfully change the gene that would make someone susceptible to HIV. Essentially,
Yeah.
yeah, I did come across that case because I wanted to. The two things I had, were the most famous cases that people have heard of. It was that one, the doctor in China, and then the dire wolf situation. And actually, that doctor, he was actually arrested, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison because it violated the Chinese rule of ethics for gene therapy at the
Wow.
time.
Wow.
Really? Wow.
So people are not
Um,
necessarily completely on board with this yet.
so is it kind of like a microscopic Beyblades where they take the cells that are supposed to be immune to it and they put it with the HIV virus and they just let fight it out on the
Yeah.
in the petri dish? Is that
Right.
what
Yeah.
is that how you?
No. So I'm going to go into how like they actually use it in humans, how they've
Okay.
repurposed it to work in human genomes. Some of the
They
other uses, though, sorry.
no. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to go into some of the other uses that have been proposed for
I
it. So if you had something
Yeah. I
related to
just
that.
real quick. I also read an article years ago about scientists using CRISPR to edit the genome for mosquitoes so that
Hmm.
they won't carry malaria.
Oh.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be. And then there was a big uproar for that one too because when you change the genetic sequence of a specific animal species, they don't know what it's going to do for the reproduction of the future generation of that species, whether it's going to die them out, kill them
Mhm.
out, whether it's going to mutate them, and then that changes the whole ecosystem of of
Yeah.
that
What?
specific species.
Yeah. What if you're
And then it
creating
change,
something
yeah,
weird, something worse?
and then it just
Mhm.
it's like a chain reaction. Then the bugs that eat the mosquitoes, et cetera, that it all gets mutated. But anyway, that's all I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because I think I had heard of something like that happening, and that is a huge concern. I mean, you see the trade off there because obviously there's so many horrible diseases that are carried by mosquitoes that really terribly afflict people in those warmer climates. But obviously, yeah, you could create something worse or create a bigger problem that you
Hmm.
can't anticipate
Right.
necessarily. So that's another use. Another category is they looked at how to do this agriculturally, so modifying plants and crops to either
Mm.
create crops that are more drought resistant, or even they've looked into removing allergens from certain crops. Which, as someone who can't eat wheat, I'm not necessarily opposed to. um, but yeah, so that's another one. They've also wanted to use it for drug research. They can use it to identify drug targets, biomarkers, and even mechanisms of drug resistance. They were using it some, actually, I guess, in COVID-19 diagnosis and some treatment. I don't think it was done like extensively, but that was something that I saw in some of the papers I read that they were actually using it. And then another one I came across today is they've also been proposing ways to use it in infertility treatments.
Ooh,
Okay.
that makes
Hmm.
sense.
So
Yeah.
two things. You said that you can't eat wheat, right? I've heard a lot of stories about people who are gluten intolerant going over to like Europe and they are able to eat everything. And I think
Hmm.
What?
our
Mhm.
agricultural
Yeah.
practices. Um, Back in the day, they used to. So I think wheat has a, and you can stop me if I'm wrong, but wheat has
Mhm.
a natural defense mechanism that once it's sprouted, that goes away. That encasing or that poison or whatever goes away,
Mhm.
and then it makes it like by that point and so the way that we used to do it was we would cut the wheat, we'd lay it in the field,
Mhm.
and then the dew would come up, it would sprout the grain, and then they'd collect it like a day or so later, but now they cut and collect all at the same time, and then they highly process it, they bleach it, they do all that kind of stuff to
Mhm.
make the flours that we use. Whereas other countries have like outlawed some of our agricultural practices
Because
that
of that.
because yeah,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if it's because of that or if, probably. So where you're seeing like these huge gluten intolerances and stuff like that, I've heard even my own family members go over to, Switzerland or somewhere like that where they have better agricultural practices and they can eat bread, they can eat all these things that
Mhm.
they can't eat here because our agri is just so highly industrialized. Um,
Yeah.
is that
Um,
so?
no,
I guess
you're
my
correct. You're correct on that.
so why so to me it's like let's fix a problem with something and create a more of a problem using CRISPR technologies and like let's get rid of the gluten and all that other stuff to
Mhm.
that it won't even grow that defense mechanism. Why don't we just change our practices for one? On how we harvest this stuff
Mhm.
to it might not be as profitable, but it's healthier.
That's it there.
Um,
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. So
yeah,
I've heard that I'm not sure if it's what you described. I've also heard that there is a natural enzyme in wheat that helps us to break it down, and that
hmm
enzyme has been removed in modification practices.
yep, there you go.
So I'm not sure. It could be both. But I know
Yep,
that many people have proposed that that's why you see such an increase in gluten intolerances because there's a difference between gluten intolerance and celiac disease. So
yep,
as far as I know, I don't have celiac disease. Celiac disease is genetic,
yep,
and there's records that it existed for way back in ancient times.
yep.
Um, but there is a very high prevalence of gluten intolerance. So personally, I actually ate wheat for most of my life up to this
hmm
point, and I had no problems. I did not have problems with it until 2020. That's when I started to have the major issues with it.
Yep,
So yeah, I've heard what you've said. Like lots of people who are able to go to other countries and they're able to eat the wheat there, as long as they're not someone who has celiac disease, they're able to eat the wheat in other countries.
yeah.
And also, some people have had success with eating homemade sourdough because same thing, the sourdough breaks down the gluten proteins the way that enzyme naturally would, so it's easier for
Huh.
people to digest.
Well, and I know
Um,
there's diseases you can contract from like ticks. Ticks are huge in the
mhm.
Midwest
Lyme.
here. Well,
Yeah,
alpha gal is one where all of a sudden you can't eat red meat,
yeah,
and it's
that's
because
caused
of a
by
tick
the
bite.
Lone Star tick.
What?
Dude, I'd
What'd
kill
you say?
myself.
Dude, yeah, put me
It's
in a
caused by the Lone
casket.
Star tick.
Yeah.
Lone Star tick. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Which I got bit by, so we'll see if I throw up when I eat a steak next time. So,
Oh, that would be horrible.
yeah, I like chicken or fish anyway better. So
Do you
it's
really?
good. Yeah,
Mhm.
Oh,
Oh,
sits better.
I wouldn't have nailed that on you.
Yeah.
Mm.
give me all the red meat.
Anyway,
Yeah.
the second thing you said is CRISPR has been used for some COVID treatments. Does this have anything to do with mRNA vaccinations or anything like that?
As far as I know, that was not related. It sounded like it was more treatment based, not the vaccination related.
Okay.
And as far as it seems to me, like they seems like the mechanisms are very different. For one thing, and I'll talk about a little bit about this, how they do this, but CRISPR is used in such a way that it's able to go into the nucleus and actually edit the DNA. That's like the whole basis of what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Um, the mRNA and the vaccines cannot. So RNA can never go into a nucleus.
Okay.
It can only come out. So I
Okay.
know like that was one thing people were really concerned with when they heard that the vaccines were mRNA based. Is they were worried that it could change DNA.
Yeah.
That's actually not possible because RNA cannot enter into a nucleus.
Right, because
It
RNA
can't
is like the carbon copy of what. So you've got like the
have.
GATTACA or whatever, and
Hmm.
then the RNA is like a carbon copy or like a mirror image of that then
Hmm.
gets transferred along the what is it the different lines to go get enacted somewhere else.
The
Yeah, there's different
mitochondria.
types of RNA that have different functions. But yeah, essentially what you're saying is right. Is RNA is what acts as a template, specifically in like DNA repair and replication.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, what you're saying is correct,
Cool.
as far as I know. I could be totally wrong. Who knows?
Wow.
No, you're right.
Kurt's
You're right.
pretty
100%.
smart.
I know a lot. I
Okay,
know a
so
little about a lot. I know
yeah,
a little about a
exactly.
lot.
The jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, it's
But
better than a
in
master
the
of one. That's how the saying ends.
maybe
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, it depends. Like someone's gonna operate on my heart. I probably want them to be really good at operating on my heart and not really good at operation and knitting and sewing and anything
Yeah,
else on the planet.
that's true.
So, looking at how they've taken this and been able to use it to work specifically in humans, in the human genome. So, typically, if you look up CRISPR, you'll see that the most commonly used one is CRISPR Cas9. So, Cas9 is just a protein. So, when I described before the process, it works in bacteria where you have the protein that comes and it stores that RNA sequence and then it's able to latch on and cut apart the DNA. That's a protein. In some bacteria, Cas9 is that protein. And I'll talk about why they use Cas9 specifically in humans in a little bit. So it was kind of a major breakthrough because it was just much simpler and more efficient because it is, and again, I don't completely understand this, but it is easier and and the methods are more precise to edit or redesign a sequence of RNA instead of trying to change a protein. So, from my understanding, that's why CRISPR is so popular for this activity. Um, so, you have the Cas9 protein, and it has this encoded segment of RNA, and they're able to determine what that encoded segment of RNA should be as far as how they want to change the DNA. So, you have it's my understanding you typically will have two strands of RNA in these, they call them protein complexes. So you'll have one that'll be like the recognition sequence to be able to determine here's the gene we need to find and edit, and then you'll have the one that has the template for what the new DNA sequence should be. So it's able to bind to DNA at the specific point at where that gene is mutated. So mutation in the DNA is basically like a typo. Most of them are actually they don't amount to anything. Like you actually you're constantly getting mutations, and your body is constantly recognizing them and destroying them. Some mutations are completely neutral, like you won't notice any effect. But then you actually obviously have some that are harmful, and that can kind of be a spectrum. So, like I have blue eyes, that's technically a genetic mutation. It does make me more sensitive to sunlight than someone with dark eyes, but that's not going to like shorten my life or negatively impact me that way. Obviously, the problem is that, like I said before, there's a lot of diseases. When you're talking about specifically humans, there's a lot of diseases that are inherited, so they're caused by these gene mutations that keep getting passed down through generations. So the protein is then able to, once it binds onto that section of DNA, it can it can cut that strand of DNA, and then either it'll remove the section entirely. And again, I think it just depends on the situation. In some cases, you can do this and you don't have to put something else in there. That's called a deletion, where you would just take out that whole segment of DNA and let it repair itself. Or you use the pre-coded RNA to bind to that gap and then essentially reprogram the DNA by changing it. So that would be an insertion. So think about the RNA almost as like a GPS, like it guides the protein to where it's going to latch on. So you can kind of think of the protein almost as like a little pair of scissors.
Yeah.
Like there's almost like a little pair of scissors in there, and then it can cut the nucleotide.
So if you could reprogram DNA, now I'm thinking total mad scientist here. Like, in Jurassic Park, they had that little, cartoon where they cut the DNA and they inserted frog DNA to make up
where it had the missing
portions of DNA. If we were to do something like that, now from what I'm understanding, like, in the Bible, God made like for like. You're never going to have a giraffe become a tiger, that kind of thing. But if you are able to reprogram the DNA, could you make these crazy hybrids like that? And if so, what are, like how does that, where does it stop, with altering human DNA? Because I've heard somebody talking about using this technology to, like, sharks don't get cancer, sharks don't get, and so taking shark DNA and kind of implementing it into that. Are we going to have people walking around with dorsal fins or something like that? Yeah, I guess. Like, I mean, What do we got? What's going on with that? Like, I know this is totally off the wall mad science stuff, but
No, I think it's good to talk about though, because I think sometimes when you hear how these things work, it can be really easy to like let our imaginations kind of run wild
yeah.
and think about things that maybe are not probable. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. I've seen Jurassic Park, so I know what you're talking about with the frog DNA. I would say Jurassic Park is maybe they're a little bit over exaggerating something that could be possible. So that's essentially this is how what they did with the dire wolves is they took ancient and dire wolf DNA and to know what the sequence was, they were able to compare it. They compared it to all the extant, which means currently living. You have extant versus extinct. All the extant canid species. So they looked at coyote DNA, gray wolf DNA, and a couple others, and they found that it most closely matched with gray wolves. So they were then able to isolate what are the differences. And I think it was like they found 15 genomic variances. Now that doesn't mean that they only had to go in and fix it at 15 sites. That means that there was 15 genes that were different. Genes are actually really complicated. Sometimes the way you get presented in like your basic biology high school class, you think like, oh, I just have this one gene and there's this copy and this copy, and that's just not how it works. There's usually like a lot more that's involved. But they found 15 variations, and some of them were for like the hair color, the body size, and ear, skull, and facial morphology. So essentially the way that their face looks and the way it's formed. Um, so they then went into they took gray wolf embryos and they used CRISPR to change the genes, change the genes so that those at those 15 sites instead of having the gray wolf DNA, they had the dire wolf DNA.
Okay.
So that's what they did to the embryos. They then though had to like bring those embryos. You had to like then bring them to term. So they then used the gray wolves as surrogates. The only reason that was feasible is because they had a living, very closely related ancestor or
Right.
closely related relative. Um, so I think the problem in like the Jurassic Park theory is that you have to have something that's close enough in relation to actually grow that organism,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. And then as far as like animal hybrids are concerned, so animal hybrids like they do sometimes happen naturally,
Yeah.
but there's actually a lot of
Like,
barriers in place to keep them from continuing. So
right.
most like really out there animal hybrids are actually sterile, or their next generations will be sterile.
What kind of
And we call
examples
these,
can you give? Like, what kind of hybrids are you talking about?
so ligers,
Okay. Like,
which actually don't occur. They actually don't occur naturally. You can breed them together, and you can get like an offspring that will survive to adulthood. It cannot breed though; it's sterile. I think another one is, I believe, I don't know if you've heard of the zorse and the zonkies.
Oh
They're
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
mix between a donkey and a zebra, or a zebra and a horse. I believe those are also sterile. Um, so we call these reproductive barriers, and this is kind of what helps determine what is different species.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, if something cannot breed at all, that clearly means they're not the same species. If they can breed and produce a hybrid offspring, but that hybrid offspring is sterile and cannot reproduce, that typically also indicates that they are not the same species.
So so from what I'm understanding, naturally lions and tigers they get it on, and then it becomes a liger, right?
So
And
they
then
actually don't naturally.
okay,
This only happens when people do this artificially.
right when
So like
when
they can like artificially inseminate them
right right
and
right
they
right
can create
right.
hybrids, but the
They don't
hybrids
mate.
cannot then breed.
Yeah, they don't mate. Okay, so hypothetically, could if you did that artificially inseminate and make a liger, then could you use CRISPR to edit the gene to so they are not sterile,
Not sterile.
and then continue
The
the
liger.
the liger? I think that's a question.
I'm
I don't
not,
know. I don't
no,
know.
it's an interesting question. I forget the reasons why the hybrids are sterile, but I would have to look more into that. And I know it has something to do with like just different genetic types.
Sure.
I would have to look more into that, but that's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, with CRISPR, you can edit pretty much anything.
The gene.
So you could, especially like
You
for
can, but well, here's the thing: a lot of so like if you wanted to make major changes to an organism, you would have to do that as to it as an embryo.
right.
And if you changed it, you could change it so much to the point the embryo would actually abort itself and it would not develop.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But I like
Gotcha.
so we can do minor changes. For example, like you said,
Yeah.
your blue eyes is a genetic mutation. So they could
Hmm.
go. Let's just say two brown eyes people mate, and they they have the embryo, and they can edit the embryo so they can have green eyes.
Yeah,
Correct.
so this is one of the ethical concerns with this
Right.
technology is they can do that. They call it designer babies,
Right. So
where
you
you
can
could
make
just
them
make cosmetic changes to
right.
the DNA.
And not even just cosmetic changes. Like I mean, I guess cosmetic changes with like muscle mass, things like that, where you
Yeah.
can make these
You can make a Michael
somewhat
Jordan.
called super soldiers.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I mean, there is sure ethical concerns, but
Well, you said
Mhm.
that there was a genetic blocks between types or species. Could
Mhm.
could we at some point in the future find those blocks and remove them? Like to where you could then take the dire wolves and put them into a dolphin, and the dolphin can. I mean,
Oh,
yeah, they'll,
stop it.
they'll they'll drown,
I
of course, but like
I don't think so because I
A
don't know if it's a
dolphin?
genetic thing. I don't know if it's like a gene that says, "Hey, this isn't the right parent. Let's
right.
abort." I think it's just they just can't develop. Like it's just it doesn't become viable. The term that's used is viable. So that's like another reproductive barrier is you sometimes can have a species or two species that can mate, like they will find each other and they will mate, but the embryo that's created will abort itself or
Yeah.
it won't ever develop.
So
And I
what you're
don't know
saying
that
is
that's
there's
necessarily a genetic thing.
it's not just lights and clockwork. Then there's something directing this.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning, like, it's not just a string of DNA. There's something that's stopping
Something is in there
mutations
that's
like
like,
that.
this ain't right.
Yeah.
I'm not doing
like
this.
a fall safe,
Like, is there?
like a fail safe.
It's kind of seems
Oh,
that
I
way,
see what you're
right?
saying.
It
Yeah,
seems like it's intelligently designed, maybe.
I figured that's the like the route you were
Gotcha.
going down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really a molecular explanation for that. I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
I deal with the things I can see. I don't, I have a harder time with things I can't see.
But you
Um,
did
but
you
yeah,
did
no, I
say
think
that
you're making a good
you did say that the like for instance the ligers because they're not doing that naturally. Somebody's doing it for them like a human,
point.
and they
Yeah. Mhm.
become sterile because of that. Is that just because of that crossbreeding? The sterilization happens.
Yeah, for some
Is that
reason,
right?
like, and again, I would have to do a little bit more research into this, but there are some species that they can mate, but for some reason the offspring becomes sterile.
The offspring.
So I think mules are actually an example of this. I think mules occur naturally, but I'm pretty sure they're sterile. Like
Yeah. It's
horse
a
and a
horse and a
donkey will,
donkey. Yeah.
yeah, and I think they will naturally if they're in the same environment. They sometimes do mate, but I think mules are sterile.
Mm.
Mm.
Wow. Okay.
I'm gonna look that up really quick.
Yeah. Pull it
I
up,
know I
Jamie.
kind of want to as well.
Yeah, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know anything about this.
I don't know anything.
But like, so the mutations, for example, their your eyes, hair colors, those are genetic coding that is it passed down through parents and whatever. Um, and so the gene editing CRISPR can edit those specific appearances, um, but at that micro level, those minor things, not like a
Mhm.
macro evolution, like for example, getting a fin from
Right.
a dolphin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could we say that this new technology and uh, the research into this new technology kind of confirms the idea of this or debunks the idea of the macro evolution of species.
Dude, that's a good question.
Mm.
What? Wait. What? Sorry, I'm getting a little lost here. Why?
I
Why
think
would it be wrong?
what he's saying with these blocks where these things can't mate between the types,
Mhm.
right? So that
Yeah.
macroevolution says that things are always evolving in these, and from what I'm understanding, evolution explaining is that these small changes, these what you called
Mhm.
uh, what do you call them?
Genetic
Mutations.
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 Thank you. I
Yeah.
couldn't think of the word.
Mutation.
The genetic mutations lead to larger changes over time. But I
Mhm.
read a book called Genetic Entropy, written by a geneticist, and he says that almost always, even if it's beneficial, or always, even if it's beneficial, it is a loss of information. So, say sickle cell
That's
anemia,
correct.
it is a loss of that suppleness of the red blood cells. So, it is a death sentence, but it extends the life of the organism out further when the environment is so hostile to its life anyway. So, think about somebody getting malaria and they live in a high malarial environment, like say Africa or something like that, or now Florida.
Amazon.
People get sickle cell anemia, which has its own problems, but that's a loss of information where the blood cell cannot fully take on oxygen, like it's or whatever nutrients it's supposed to take up.
Like
So,
it's supposed to be natural.
yes. And I do have an answer. A mule is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Donkeys have 62 chromosomes, horses have 64, so mules end up with 63 chromosomes, an odd number that can't divide evenly during meiosis. This
Yeah.
prevents the formation of viable sex cells, making reproduction virtually impossible.
Are you telling me
Yeah,
there's horses out
that's the
there?
reason.
Are you telling me there are horses out there looking for donkeys?
Yeah.
No, they don't necessarily like. It's not necessarily a case of they will look for them, but if they're put in the same, if they're like come across each other in the same environment and their behavior is similar enough,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's another thing. But sometimes,
I mean, I get it. I get
I
it.
would just say I
they're
wouldn't think that a horse
anthropomorphizing
would
these
go,
animals.
Yeah.
look at that little guy.
That's
I
right.
got nothing to do. It's 11
Yeah.
o'clock at night. I mean, it's a Saturday.
Yeah,
Why
the
not?
barn's open.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
and that's a mule.
That's a mule.
Okay.
Yeah,
Juan
that
Valdez
was
uses mules, by the way.
Who?
Juan Valdez.
Who's that?
He picks beans down in Colombia. Coffee beans.
Oh, you talking about
The Juan Valdez, dude.
the Folgers
Yeah,
guy on the
Folgers.
cover? The
Yeah,
Folgers?
whatever. He's down there. He's got all kind of mules. Anyway,
All right.
go ahead,
That's
Chris.
a drug mule.
Oh no, that's different.
That's El Chapo you're talking about.
No, that's Tom Cruise.
Okay.
This episode brought to you by El Chapo.
Oh, don't do that. We'll get murked.
Yeah, we're done.
We're done.
FBI, open up. All right.
But
go
yeah,
ahead,
Curtis,
Hannah.
Curtis. I was gonna say Curtis was right that I don't know why for some reason I couldn't remember that. I knew it had something to do with um, like I'm not remember the correct terms, but yeah, it has to do with typically there's different number of chromosomes, so you can't form the reproductive cells
Yeah.
in most of these.
So
But
the mules
anyway,
are just done.
They're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
Just had to make it
You're
up.
you
finished.
can't form. So there are
It's kinda
there are
sad.
some species though that they can form offspring that will continue to mate. So this colossal bioscience who did the dire wolves, um, they one of the things they've talked about is they've talked about using CRISPR not just to bring back extinct species, but to help keep endangered species from going extinct.
That makes
Oh, okay.
And one of the species they talked about is actually a very controversial one. It's called the red wolf.
Yeah.
And if you look it up, you'll feel like, oh my word, these poor things are so endangered because there's like less than 1,000.
Really?
The thing
Like
is,
the
they're
skinwalker looking things.
The red
no.
wolf?
Those
Oh,
things are creepy.
Well, the thing is, the red wolf is just a product. It's just a hybrid between a coyote and a gray wolf.
Yeah.
oh,
So people are making it's a huge controversy right now in the conservation world. Is should we really be pouring resources into something? Is it actually a species essentially, or is it just a hybrid that tends to occur when they're in the same area?
Oh,
But
Gotcha.
they are very viable though. Like they can reproduce and continue. So that's an example of a hybrid where they can.
Oh, that's
So I
something
mentioned
was
before.
thinking. I was
Oh,
saying
really?
there's
Which
this
one were you thinking about?
there's this wolf out there that's like it has a really long legs and really small body, and it just looks like a skinwalker.
yeah, chupacabra.
Yeah, something like that. But
Or the
it's
dire wolves are huge though.
but
I mean,
but
that just sounds like a wolf.
here's
They
the
have really long
thing
legs.
with the even with the dire wolves that they made. So you're saying that they took basically gray wolf DNA and they altered
Mhm.
it with some of the functions that the dire wolf would have had, like the size, the facial construction, those kinds of things to make it look like a dire wolf. But essentially, it's just an altered gray wolf.
Yeah, so that's a thing that some people have brought up. Here's the thing though, genetically it's a dire wolf because they did actually change the DNA. And so one of the things I also came across is there's a difference between somatic and germline editing.
Mm.
So somatic is like soma, like your cells.
Yeah.
This is done in vivo, which means it's done on an actual organism. So there's different types of CRISPR treatment. Somatic would be done to an adult or a child who's like already been born and fully developed,
Right.
even a baby. This would be somatic. Um, it affects the tissues of the body, and it's not heritable. So you would not pass those differences on to your children.
Gotcha.
And so then I think where the bigger ethical question comes in is there's germline editing, where you're either editing the embryo or you're editing the individual sperm and egg um, before they
Before, oh,
fertilize.
Okay.
And that those changes
before
are
they even
permanent,
do
and
that.
they are heritable. Like those changes are then passed on to their offspring. So it's my understanding that the dire wolf was created using germline editing.
Okay.
So genetically, they are dire wolves. They will create more dire wolves. Like they're not going to create anything that looks like a gray wolf,
Oh,
Okay.
probably.
And that was done
So
because the only thing that was left that was a gray wolf was the same between the two species.
it had the genome was the closest.
Right. Okay.
Like I think the other ones were so close they probably could have used them, but they found there were the least amount of differences between them and the gray wolf.
Okay.
So they made those 15 changes and they actually changed the genes. So there's actually different ideas of what constitutes different species in biology. And one of them is strictly genetic. It's do they have a different sequence of DNA? Are their genomes different? By that definition, they are dire wolves and they are a different animal,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
yeah.
Some
You,
people don't agree. Some people say what you said, that they're just altered gray wolves, but genetically, in my opinion, genetically they are dire wolves. If they reproduce, they'll create more dire wolves.
It'd be like reading a book that has been altered and then but has the same, just a little bit different cover. Says some of the same stuff in there,
yeah,
but technically it's a different book.
like Rings of Power.
Come on, don't get into this source material. Come on.
Hey,
It
so
was a good show.
actually, the dire wolf used to actually be a real species on the planet.
Yeah.
That went
Yeah,
extinct.
that's
Like
how
a
they
dodo,
created
like the
it.
dodo
They had to
bird.
get its DNA.
Were they really
Yeah,
just larger wolves basically?
I think so.
Were they huge?
I
Like
mean, a lot when you look at a lot of we have so many things have gone extinct. It's hard for us to imagine this, but
yeah,
a lot of animals that used to live, like they weren't that different.
right.
Like they looked very similar, but there was enough either morphological or genetic differences
Yeah.
that they technically were different species.
I don't know what's going on in Skinwalker Ranch, but a dire wolf, they said, eyewitnesses, a dire wolf attacked one of the cows.
That cow was in dire need
Yeah.
of
It was in dire need of
friends.
a wolf. Anyway,
Next.
what
Saber-tooth
what I was
tigers.
gonna,
Saber. There we
here's,
go.
Yeah,
here's
saber-tooth
my
tigers.
thing.
That's
Here's
what
my
you need
thing.
to bring back.
If things go extinct, shouldn't they just be extinct? Why do we want them back?
Well, if you died, I'd want
Yeah,
you back.
that's a
No,
Yeah.
I'm just I'm just another human.
We're
Humans
getting-
haven't went extinct.
We're getting your CRISPR DNA stuff
Okay,
going
good.
on, just in case.
no, that's a
And
good question because that's something that people have brought up is what exactly do you do with an extinct animal when you bring it back? If it's been extinct for thousands of years, the ecological niche it once occupied is now occupied by something else. You can't
yeah, something
necessarily just
different. So
put it back
how's it
out in
gonna
the
look?
open
Yeah, and they addressed that
wild.
in Jurassic Park as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking. They said you taking billions of years and putting this thing where it used to live. Now it's living here. It's not gonna. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
He said even plants. You've built plants here that were extinct. That now anyway. What I was gonna ask is
Look,
the
nobody cares. Byron.
nobody cares?
No, I was listening. You just cut yourself off.
No, they were just making the point, and I don't know if it's fictitious or not. They were saying you've got plants in this park that used to live billions of years ago that are poisonous and can't be around humans right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the point. No,
No, I get what you're going with. It's the
it's
environment.
like why bring that
the
back?
environment no longer supports
Yeah,
the thing. So like my argument for that would be is if the thing, like we have pictures of animals that are since been extinct since the picture was taken. There's like a lion that was taken. I can't remember what species it was, but it was a particular type of lion, but that was the last one and they took a picture of it right before it died off or whatever. And there's been like, I don't know, you get on Instagram, look up extinct animals that have pictures. And since we've had the camera technology, they've taken pictures of stuff. that have since gone extinct. And if it's gone extinct because of industrialization or
Something humans,
deforestation, something like that, well, I mean, then that doesn't mean that
they should have went out.
that the ecology
Yeah.
doesn't support them. It just means that we did something that if we could undo it, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But
Well, you have to think it's not just a matter of the environment changing. It has to do with ecological niches. So you have to think of an ecosystem like a puzzle, where and each living species makes up a piece of the puzzle. And what happens in ecosystems is if a niche is like each piece of the puzzle. If a niche is vacated, like that species leaves the area or dies off, something else comes to take its place, and the ecosystem adapts.
yeah,
So what happens is eventually that piece of the puzzle is no longer there,
yeah,
that space where they were. So if you try to put them back in there, something else has already occupied, and you could potentially have devastating effects on it. Not
Also,
necessarily always. Um,
kind of
like
competing with
there,
something that replaced it.
yeah, exactly. And there's all kinds of problems. There's all kinds of problems that can be created by this because with competition, you have species that outcompete others, and in some cases, that can cause them to like completely devastate everything else that was
Yeah.
there. So, like predators are really important in ecosystems because they kind of keep certain things in check.
well, they
And
they've
when you
been
take them
checking.
out,
They've been checking on Yellowstone since they released wolves back into Yellowstone,
mhm,
and like whole areas have just started to flourish because
yeah,
the mule deer and stuff like that were overpopulating, and now
mhm,
and from what I understand is wolf packs and even coyote packs will self-regulate their breeding uh, versus the amount of food and things that are in the area, so
mhm,
they will never
yeah.
overhunt an
Well, this is
area.
this is something this is something that um, is common in every ecosystem has what's called a carrying capacity, which is like the maximum amount of that species it can handle before the resources run out. So that's kind of what you're referring to. I don't know if it's necessarily something that they do themselves. It's just something that naturally happens that they won't have more than what they can be provided with essentially.
Kind of like what happens down in the Everglades in Florida, like with all the gators. Like
Oh,
they
the
have to,
Amazon.
we have to control it by hunting the gators because they just, you know,
I've heard the converse of that though. With there's open season on coyotes in the Midwest, basically almost every state, and then you go down to like Texas and stuff. They got the pigs and stuff, right? They don't self-regulate.
Mhm,
They eat crops. They
Right.
decimate agriculture and stuff.
mhm.
That's a problem for humans, but like in
Yeah.
that area, like coyotes specifically, I talked to a guy that worked for the EPA, and he was against the open season on coyotes because the more you hunt the coyotes, the more that they breed to repopulate. They're
mm,
missing, but then if they, like he said, that they were very self-regulatory in the sense that their breeding patterns will slow down if they're
that's
overpopulated
interesting.
in an area. I don't know if
Right.
I agree with that
Yeah.
because I was all for
Well,
the open
yeah.
season on it, but
That's not a self-regulatory thing. That's just they're starting to use up the resources and they just can't sustain having
yeah,
any more. That happens with anything.
yeah,
Good point.
Um, so yeah, like Jason, you mentioned the Everglades. The big problem down there is the Burmese pythons,
Right.
which are invasive.
Ooh.
People had them as pets. They let them go, and they were able to just outcompete everything there as far as eating a lot of they call them mesopredators. Um, so now a lot of those animals are in danger of extinction in the Everglades because you've got the Burmese pythons that have just blown up because they've been able to eat all of these small animals in such excess.
Mm,
mm,
I like it.
I think going back on the dire wolf and the CRISPR and the woolly mammoth, I think this is my personal opinion. I think they're using this research to as a stepping stone to go further.
Yeah,
Not just because we want the dire wolf
yeah.
back.
They're being
We
nice.
just want the dire wolf.
We just want
I
to bring
think
back
there's
the
if
endangered animals.
if it works here, they're able to do
Yeah.
other stuff like or I don't know. Are they even working on um, editing genes for getting rid of diseases?
Yeah, they are.
yeah.
They are. So they
They are.
actually are doing that.
Yeah.
So then, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the ethical concerns, here's a question I had after doing this. After explaining the difference between somatic and germline, do you think there's an ethical difference between the two?
I think so because one changes the DNA structure for its offspring, and the other one It doesn't. It ends it right then and there. Correct. That's what
Hmm.
you. So the
Yeah.
offspring will continue to breed and continue to live on with that edited gene. Let's just say that they edited somebody's uh, genetic code so they have more muscle mass, and now it just is in their code, and that's what happens, right? So
Hmm.
now that you have these
Yeah.
big
So
6'4" big Viking dudes just getting all of the football positions in the
Yeah.
NFL. And you got me and Byron over
We
here.
can't
We're
do
like,
anything.
we can't get a nickel for
We're,
our
we're
grandma.
carrying the water.
Yeah.
So
Some
yeah.
high quality
so
H2O.
then another question is there a difference between treatment and cosmetic differences? Like, do you have a problem with the germline editing if they are trying to treat the individual? Because, like I said, a lot of what they're looking at is treating some of these genetic diseases, which can just be so horrible and
Mm-hmm.
really
I
affect
kind of have a
people's lives.
problem with that.
I don't have a problem with any of it. The genetic appearances or the for diseases. I think what you can't compete with when somebody's got that dog in them. Okay, when somebody's got the will, that's you can't compete with that, and that isn't um,
So I
passed down. That's like, for example, David and Goliath, right?
Yeah.
Goliath was this big, huge dude, right?
Yeah. Nephilim.
Nephilim.
Nephilim. And what was David?
Well, so I guess my question is like, if you're talking about editing an embryo so that it does not develop cystic fibrosis,
Mm-hmm.
is that different than editing an embryo so that they have blue versus brown eyes?
And
Yes.
that's germline that you're talking about, right?
That's germline.
I
Yeah.
And
believe
what's
I
the other
believe that
kind?
is different.
I don't.
What's the other
The
kind?
other is somatic. So like think
Somatic,
of
right?
soma.
Okay, so I looked up some of the medicinal therapies. Actually, looked up a few different things, but one was for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia,
Ooh.
um, the Leber congenital amaurosis, which is a rare form of inherited blindness. They said there were some positive outcomes, but some of the negative outcomes were off-target effects, meaning
Hmm.
unintended DNA edits, and then ethical concern over access. Treatments are expensive, so only the super rich are getting these,
Oh.
and then long-term effects are still being studied, so they don't know the long-term effects of these edits. There was like the HIV resistance engineering. The germline editing raises massive ethical and safety concerns. The scientist was imprisoned for violating ethics laws. I think that's what you talked about, Hannah.
Hmm.
There's stuff in agriculture. So negative outcomes are intellectual property concerns. I've heard this a lot where, let's say, I name a seed company, but they will sell a whole crop to,
Monsanto.
well, Monsanto. Let's just say they're a seed producer. Monsanto will plant a whole field of their crops. Now they can go and test the farmer next door or a county over, and if a pollinator has brought some of the pollen from that genetic mutated or genetic engineered um, crop over to this other farmer who did not purchase that seed, the companies are now suing that farmer, saying you have our crop and you didn't purchase it from us.
That's right.
And so there's huge intellectual property concerns, meaning like you can't stop the pollinators from going from one place to the other, but then that genetic code will be found in his plants, and then it raises concerns there. So ecological impacts of edited genes spread into wild populations, especially since we don't know the long-term effects of it. Like, why do we have a huge outbreak of gluten intolerance and things like that? Could that be because we've been messing with the genes? Skepticism and labeling controversies. So there's more. It all goes down to long term effects, and because it's kind of a newer technology in the whole scheme of things, and we're enacting it on like unregulated populations. Like a farmer's field is not regulated. You can't. You can plant that seed that was genetically altered, but you can't control the pollinators that
Yeah.
pollinate between fields. And so who owns the seed that was cross pollinated with a regular seed? And then you have like these people selling heirloom seeds. How can you know that those are heirloom seeds? Well, they were handed down and handed down and handed down, but let's say they were cross pollinated with a genetically altered one, that's a problem. especially if it
Mhm.
makes our food eventually in the long term effects, if it makes our food that we're growing um, impossible to consume.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's not one that I'd come across, but it makes a lot of sense for sure.
Well, I'll answer your question. The difference of somebody changing something because they're trying to get a disease out, or changing somebody's blue eyes. I think it shouldn't be, because if you're trying to fix something that's broke, yes, I'm okay with that. But if you're trying to
Mhm.
change somebody that has brown eyes to blue eyes, it's not broke. It's natural. So why should you mess
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, in my
It's
opinion,
my
I
opinion.
think that yeah, I agree. Obviously it's very new and they need to, like right now, I know they're still in the clinical trial stage. So I think they started in 2019 trying to use it to treat sickle cell anemia, which probably is what Curtis is referring to. But as it progresses, if they find that they can minimize some of these negative effects and it turns out to be effective, I personally have no problem with it being used in medical treatment because, like I said, I've known some people who suffered from some of these
Hmm.
genetic diseases, and they're pretty devastating in some cases. And to me, when you're talking about germline editing, I think that's where people wonder, well, should you do it without, the child's consent? Any parent treats their child like,
Hmm.
if you have a baby that's born and has health issues, you're not going to wait for the baby to grow up to ask them, hey, did you want to be treated? Back when
Right.
you were a baby and
Yeah.
you're having these health issues. Whereas, so for
True.
me, treatment I have no problem with, but cosmetic enhancement is where I feel that should be the choice of the individual. And sometimes that's things that, like, when you're a kid, you kind of like don't think about. Like when I was younger, I had friends who all had their ears pierced as babies, and I asked my mom, like, why didn't you pierce my ear when I was a baby? Like, I really want my ears pierced. And she said one of the reasons she gave me, she's like, well, I wanted you to make that decision for yourself. And as a kid, I was like, that's weird, that's stupid. I just want my ears pierced. And
Hmm.
obviously, I didn't understand it. But as an adult now, I'm like, oh, she realized that was a decision that I should be able to make as a person. Like, she shouldn't have made that decision for me, and I
Hmm.
appreciated it more, as an adult. And obviously, I think when you're dealing with somebody's genes, that's an even much more serious issue than,
Yeah.
whether or not you pierce somebody's ear, because that is more permanent, and that's a preference of the parent. And again, like we said, that's a change that's then going to be passed on to their children.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Here's
they're both they're doing that because they want their baby to be look cute.
well
They're doing
here
it for
Mm-hmm.
themselves.
here's a physical appearance that you can alter
Okay.
that could affect the life of the person in a medicinal way.
Okay.
For example, people with darker skin, like myself, has more melanin in it, correct? And the reason
Mm-hmm.
for that is because the DNA from my lineage, we've been around the equator, closer to the sun, and help us to one block out the UV rays more efficiently than somebody that's light skinned. Correct,
Yeah.
right? So but if I'm positioned now, right? Let's just say this is a hypothetical. Let's just say
Okay.
right now I'm living in close to the equator. The job that I have, this is the 20, 30 years down the road. Job that I have has good insurance, but allows us, because this technology has been around for a while, allows us to use the CRISPR technology and says, hey, you know what? You have you have blue eyes, right? You have blue eyes, but you have brown skin. The eyes are lighter, are deteriorating quicker because you are close to the equator and the light's affecting you more than if you had brown eyes, because that's also a thing. Would you would you want for your next generation, because you're kind of locked into this ecosystem where you're in, change the your offspring's genetic makeup so they have now brown eyes?
I
Well,
would
how do
still see that as cosmetic because I think that's you're making the same argument. I mean, it's similar to changing eye color, in my opinion.
But you
Like my eye
change
color.
but you change the eye color for the fact that it's better for the individual,
yeah, but how did you get non-brown eyes?
because it is a mutation, but it can still be passed down.
Oh, okay. So
Right.
it was
Yeah.
natural.
Well,
It,
better for the
Okay.
individual is not the same as someone has a disease that it's going to negatively affect them for the rest of their life. Like,
well,
yeah, you're gonna like having light skin and living near the equator is not ideal,
but you
but
sure, but you are more prone to skin cancer when that's the case. Especially when you have lighter eyes and you're closer to the equator, you're more prone to get cataracts. You're more prone to lose your vision
Is
more
that true?
rapidly. Yeah.
Huh.
it is true. But I would say, like, you're not dealing with
I'm not
a
going down
disease that's
there.
already present.
That's just a question.
So that
It's an interesting
that,
question.
that raises another question for me. Would be like, okay, so we are several hundred generations down from the first man and woman, right? And we could, what you know, genetic entropy states that basically the second, I think the second law of thermodynamics, where everything moves from order to disorder,
Hmm.
and it genes do the same thing. The mutations over multiple generations then create mutations that are no longer beneficial to the organism. This particular geneticist that wrote that book, Genetic Entropy, stated that in 100 generations, the human genome couldn't exist. So, if we were able to use CRISPR technology to maybe remove and find a more perfect DNA, like closer towards Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
would we be able to turn off some of those mutations or replace the mutations with something that is more apt to be like how we were supposed to be, and then edit that into the germline,
Wow.
like you said, and then basically reset the human genome to something like that. I could also see this being like used for like super, rich houses or something. Like talking about the Kennedy family, they're all gonna have blonde hair and orange eyes or something like that. And now,
Designer babies.
and you'll know that they're Kennedys by their eye color and stuff like that,
That'd be sick.
or whatever. But that would be a cosmetic thing to identify you with a certain house or something like that. But back to my original thought was like, could we do that? Going back to editing the human genome at a germ level, or what do you call it, um, to get us back to a more perfect DNA as we
I
were
mean,
at
I
the
guess
beginning.
theoretically, but you'd have to do that with like everybody,
Yeah.
Right.
and you'd have to edit a lot. You'd have to edit a lot. Like I don't think
Yeah.
people realize that we're full of mutations,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
things that are technically mutations.
Yeah.
I think it would just be so ridiculously unfeasible that I don't think anybody would ever try to do that. If you're talking about the whole population.
Well, I mean, once you had a few that were perfected, then they would propagate themselves.
Wouldn't that pass down?
It would pass down, wouldn't it?
You don't have to look very far.
Yeah, but you would continue to get. I think you would continue to get mutations though. Like
Mm-hmm.
even if you change the DNA once, like that doesn't guarantee that a mutation's not going to occur further down the line.
Yeah, I'd say it almost 100% would, but you basically hit the reset
Right.
button on the human genome, go back to the beginning. And I'm not saying get everybody, but then you would have certain, let's say, genetic lines, let's say so many thousand in each area of the world, and then those people would start to propagate that perfected genome. Yeah, they'd be propagating with other people who had the mutations, but then it would, you know, I don't know. It was just a thought. Just a thought.
I've heard of that book. Is the author a Christian? I can't remember.
He is. Yeah.
Okay, because not all intelligent design people are, but I was curious if he was.
Yeah, he was. I heard him on a podcast called Evidence for Faith. I think it's since no longer in production. I think they stopped in like 2014 or something like that. But yeah, um, that was just one of the most interesting episodes because they were doing evidence against evolution as a macroevolution as a form of evolution. So, and how
Yeah.
we came to be. So,
Monkeys.
Yeah, monkeys. Hey, Hannah.
Not quite.
I looked over my questions. You've covered a lot of the
Dude,
questions I was going to ask.
such an
You've
expert.
like done it all. Is there any like
Well, I
final
kind of use it as
thought?
a guide. So.
Is there like a final thought you want to like wrap up, or you just want to leave it where we leave it?
I don't know. I guess I think the only other section in here I had that might interest you guys was some of the limitations and concerns of CRISPR, just because yeah, it was one. I know you'd asked about like the off-target effects, so I had a couple notes on those. I know Curtis mentioned them, but other than that, I think that's most of what the notes I had on here. Oh, and also, I mean, I don't, probably at this point, probably not important, but some of the different types. Like there's the Cas9 and the Cas12, and some of those different ones.
How do you This is your first time on a podcast, huh?
Oh yeah.
Did pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I covered everything I was gonna ask. I say we just wrap it up and call it a CRISPR.
Yeah, dude. I think.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is just there's still a lot they're figuring out and still a lot they're working through, and it'll just be interesting to see, you know, what they can do with it in the future. But I think it's one of these things where it's similar to AI, where the thing itself is not evil, but it can be done for good by the right people. It can also be used in a very evil way by evil people. It's a tool that it depends on the person that's using it.
Indeed.
So, hey, thanks a lot, Hannah, for coming on our show and being a guest and talking about CRISPR today. I appreciate you giving your expert.
Stick around for the next one.
Yeah.
Are you sticking around for the next one?
What's the next one? I don't even know.
That's a yes.
The next
Wait,
we're talking about Oklahoma.
Oh, I don't know if you want me on for that one. I don't know. If you're, yeah, I don't know if I'd be much help on that one.
That's okay. I'm not going to be much help either. So.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on and giving your expertise in this subject. I learned a lot.
No,
I didn't know what Cas9.
Dire wolves.
Yeah.
Donkeys.
Yeah. I didn't
Oh, I was
know.
going to say I would highly recommend, like, because this is an interesting kind of a difficult thing to visualize. I watched a lot of videos on explaining it, and that helped me a lot. So if you guys or anyone who's listening wants to, if they're hearing me talk about it and they're having a hard time visualizing it, I highly recommend. There's some videos on YouTube, and were really helpful.
All right. Well, thanks, Hannah. We're gonna let you
Yeah,
go,
thank you.
and we'll be hearing from you in the Discord. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Right now.
All right, that's gonna do it right there. That's CRISPR.
Crispy CRISPR.
Appreciate Hannah coming on and doing what she did there. You guys got any final thoughts?
Yeah, dude. I Am Legend. I forgot about that movie. They did that. They edited the genes for cancer.
Yep.
And then they got zombies.
Hey, see what happens.
Zombies.
That's what happens.
Let's do it.
It was
ready.
actually not zombies. It was
There's
vampires.
Zombie vampires.
Yeah.
If you read the book, it was vampires.
Oh wow.
But it looked like zombie
So,
vampires.
I know they did in the movie.
It was awesome.
Well, I appreciate everybody listening to today's episode. Make sure you visit us on our website, bottomofthat.com, and check out our blog for all our show notes and resource material. Also, follow us on our socials, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, we have an X account that you can log in there. If you're listening on YouTube, Rumble, and BitChute, and you like this episode, do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment. That will allow this the algorithm to serve this content up to other people that want to hear this content. And also, if you're on Spotify, also Spotify mobile app, there's going to be a question of the week, so go vote for the poll question of the week. Scroll right down on the Spotify mobile app if you're there. If you did not like this episode, I appreciate you tuning in this far.
Mm-hmm.
And tune in next week. You might hear Jason say this.
Dotson. Look, nobody cares.
Dotson here.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.